Attribution, the invisible force behind success, failure, and every decision we make. Before we begin today's episode, let me ask you a question that may feel uncomfortable if you answer it honestly. How many of the things you believe about success are actually true? And how many of them are stories that society keeps repeating until they sound believable? This episode is not about marketing tactics, productivity hacks, or motivation. It is about something far more dangerous and far more powerful. It is about attribution. It is about the human tendency to explain success and failure using the wrong reasons. Because the moment you attach success to the wrong cause, you begin repeating the wrong actions for years without realizing why your life is not moving forward. I am Zayd Haji, and today on the Zayd podcast, we are going to unpack one of the most misunderstood forces in business, marketing, careers, and life itself. Stay with me carefully because once you begin to see attribution clearly, you cannot unsee it. One of the most dangerous illusions in life is believing that you understand why something worked. The human brain hates uncertainty, so it quickly invents explanations for outcomes even when those explanations are completely wrong. This is the foundation of attribution. Attribution is simply the story we tell ourselves about what caused success or failure. In marketing, attribution means identifying what actually caused a customer to buy a product. But the deeper truth is that attribution is not just a marketing concept. It is a life skill. The way we attribute causes to outcomes determines our decisions, our careers, our investments, and even the direction of our lives. Let me give you a simple example that every one of us can relate to. Think about the last time you bought something expensive. Maybe it was a phone, a laptop, a course, or a piece of equipment for work. Now ask yourself a brutally honest question. What exactly convinced you to buy it? Most people immediately say something like, I saw an advertisement, or I watched a YouTube review, or an influencer recommended it. But if you slow down and examine the process carefully, you realize that the decision was never triggered by one moment. It was the result of a long chain of exposures. Maybe you first heard about the product from a friend. Later you saw a review on YouTube. Then you saw someone mention it on Instagram. A few weeks later, you searched for comparisons. Then you waited for your salary to come in. Only after all of these steps did you finally buy. So which moment actually caused the purchase? Was it the first video you saw, the last review you watched, the advertisement you barely remember, or the conversation with a friend that planted the initial curiosity? The truth is that none of these events alone caused the purchase. The decision emerged from a cluster of influences that slowly built conviction in your mind. And yet most companies behave as if a single advertisement is responsible for the sale. This misunderstanding has created one of the biggest strategic mistakes in modern marketing. Many companies measure everything through a concept called return on ad spend. They spend money on advertisements and then calculate how much revenue comes directly from those ads. On paper, this looks logical. It creates clean numbers that can be presented in meetings and spreadsheets. But the problem is that human behavior is not clean and linear. People do not buy products the moment they see an advertisement. Decisions are slow, layered, emotional, and often subconscious. When companies obsess over measurable actions, they begin ignoring the invisible influences that actually shape consumer behavior. The irony is that the things that are easiest to measure are often the least important, while the most important influences are extremely difficult to measure. Think about the brands that dominate the world. When you see a bottle of Coca-Cola or a pair of Nike shoes, you are not reacting to a single advertisement. You are reacting to years of cultural presence, storytelling, athlete endorsements, and emotional associations. You cannot identify the exact advertisement that made you trust those brands. The trust was built slowly across hundreds of small exposures. Now imagine what happens when a company stops investing in those long-term influences and instead focuses only on short-term measurable advertisements, something subtle but dangerous begins to happen. The brand loses its story. The brand loses its cultural presence. The brand becomes transactional instead of aspirational. This is exactly what has happened to many companies that became obsessed with performance marketing. Performance marketing promises clarity. You spend money, you track clicks, you measure conversions, and you calculate profit. It feels scientific, but in reality, it often becomes a trap because every competitor can run the same advertisements. Every competitor can target the same audience. Every competitor can use the same tools. So the cost of advertising slowly rises. The profit margin shrinks, and companies find themselves trapped in an endless cycle where they must keep increasing advertising spending just to maintain the same level of sales. Eventually, the mathematics collapses. The cost of acquiring customers becomes higher than the revenue generated from those customers. And when that happens, companies start raising product prices to compensate. Consumers notice that the price increases. Trust begins to erode. The brand weakens. All of this started with a simple mistake in attribution. Companies assumed that advertisements were the primary reason people were buying their products, but the deeper forces were brand perception, cultural influence, and long-term storytelling. This misunderstanding is not limited to companies. It appears everywhere in life. Think about how people attribute success in their careers. Many professionals believe that their degree is the primary reason they succeeded. Society encourages this belief because it makes the educational system feel justified. But if you speak honestly with successful entrepreneurs, creators, and professionals, a different picture begins to emerge. Many of them will quietly admit that their degree had very little to do with their eventual success. Their careers evolved through opportunities, relationships, timing, curiosity, and relentless experimentation. But once success arrives, the human mind wants a neat explanation. So we tell a simple story. We say the degree created the success. This is attribution again. It is the same pattern we see in business case studies. When a company becomes successful, analysts rush to identify the secret formula behind that success. One article says the company succeeded because of innovation. Another article says it was because of marketing strategy. A third article says it was because of strong leadership. All of these explanations might contain elements of truth, but none of them capture the full reality. Success is rarely the result of a single factor. It is usually the result of multiple forces aligning in the same direction over time. One of the greatest investors of our time, Charlie Munger, described this idea through what he called the Lollapalooza effect. When several powerful forces combine simultaneously, the outcome becomes far more powerful than any single factor alone. This concept explains many things in life that appear mysterious at first glance. Consider a startup that suddenly becomes extremely successful. People often search for the one genius strategy that created the success. But if you examine the situation carefully, you usually find a combination of factors. The company might have entered an emerging market that was not yet crowded. The founders might have had strong technical skills. The timing might have been perfect. The product might have solved a real problem. The team might have executed with discipline. Remove any one of these factors, and the outcome might have been very different. But the human brain struggles with complex explanations. We prefer simple stories with clear heroes and clear causes. This preference for simplicity is what creates poor attribution. Another example of this problem appears in the way people evaluate content and social media influence. Many creators believe that the success of their content can be measured purely through views and likes. But these metrics are often misleading. A video can accumulate millions of views without creating any meaningful impact. People might watch it casually and move on without remembering anything. On the other hand, a piece of content with fewer views might create deep influence if it motivates people to take action, share it with others, or remember the message weeks later. This is why some marketers consider sharing behavior to be a more meaningful indicator than views or likes. When someone shares content with another person, it usually means the message resonated deeply enough that they want someone else to see it. Sharing reflects intention. Views often reflect curiosity, but even this is only a proxy. It is not a perfect measurement. It simply moves us slightly closer to understanding real influence. The deeper truth is that many forms of influence cannot be measured cleanly at all. Think about the creators you follow online. Some of them may have influenced your thinking years before you ever bought anything related to them. Their ideas might have shaped your perspective slowly over time. Then one day, perhaps years later, you remember their name when you need a service or a product. How do you measure that influence? There is no advertisement click to track. There is no coupon code to record the moment of persuasion. The influence existed quietly in your mind long before the purchase happened. This is why many of the most effective forms of marketing look invisible in traditional data dashboards. The challenge then becomes understanding attribution in a more human way. Sometimes the only reliable method is qualitative understanding. This means speaking directly with customers, listening carefully to their stories, and identifying patterns in their experiences. Numbers alone cannot reveal these insights. They require curiosity and honesty. And honesty is extremely important because humans are very skilled at claiming credit for success even when they played a small role. This happens constantly in organizations. Direction, opportunity, skills, relationships, and timing also play enormous roles. When society attributes success solely to hard work, it oversimplifies reality and hides the importance of strategy and positioning. The same problem appears in many popular sayings. People say that if you build a great product, customers will naturally come. History shows that this is rarely true. Many excellent products fail because nobody discovers them. Others believe that talent alone determines success. Yet countless talented individuals remain unnoticed because they lack distribution or visibility. Another popular belief is that passion inevitably leads to financial success. Passion can certainly sustain effort, but markets do not reward passion alone. They reward solutions to real problems. These beliefs persist because they offer comforting narratives, but comfort does not necessarily lead to accurate understanding. If we want to make better decisions in life, we must constantly question the stories we tell ourselves about cause and effect. When something succeeds, we should ask ourselves which factors actually contributed to the outcome. When something fails, we should ask ourselves whether we are blaming the correct reasons. This kind of reflection is uncomfortable because it forces us to confront uncertainty. It forces us to admit that success often emerges from complex interactions rather than simple formulas. But once we develop this awareness, we gain a powerful advantage. We begin to identify patterns that others overlook. We become more careful about repeating actions simply because they appeared to work once. In business, the most reliable formula often turns out to be surprisingly simple. Enter a market that still has room for growth. Build a strong team of capable people. Execute consistently for a long period of time. Then remain patient long enough for the results to compound. These principles may not sound glamorous, but they reflect the underlying structure of many successful organizations. Competitors can copy tactics quickly. They can replicate features and marketing campaigns. But disciplined execution over long periods of time is much harder to imitate. When we strip away the noise, we often discover that success is less about secret strategies and more about aligning several important factors in the same direction. Understanding attribution helps us identify those factors. It helps us distinguish between actions that genuinely create progress and actions that simply make us feel productive. If you reflect honestly on your own life, you might discover that some of the activities you believed were essential are actually irrelevant. And at the same time, some small habits or relationships that you barely noticed might be playing a much larger role in your progress. Recognizing these patterns is not easy. It requires humility, curiosity, and continuous observation. But once you begin practicing this form of thinking, you develop a clearer understanding of how the world actually works, and that clarity can change the trajectory of your decisions. Before we close this episode, I want you to take a moment after listening and ask yourself a difficult question. What are the things in your life that you might be attributing wrongly? Which habits, degrees, routines, or strategies do you believe are responsible for your progress? And which ones might simply be comfortable stories you have repeated for years? Because once you correct attribution, you begin focusing on the factors that truly move your life forward. This is Zayd Haji, and you are listening to the Zayd podcast on Zayd.com. If this conversation challenged the way you think about success and decision making, share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes a single conversation can change the direction of how someone sees the world. I will see you in the next episode.